Good morning to everyone there in Oklahoma and throughout the Midwest and elsewhere in the country. Good afternoon to others. Welcome to another edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live, number 73 here at the Voice of College Football OU. Keep in mind that we post content pretty much every day, but it all starts and ends right here with what we discuss here with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, live here every Friday. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Better be glad that you're not here in Oklahoma because I don't know if you could actually make it for a full hour outside. That's hot as
No,
it
it's
is
like
here.
perfect here.
It looks
It's
nice
like
there.
80. Just right. Just right.
Yeah, that's good. No, we're doing good. We're getting that much closer. A couple of weeks from the first football game of the college football game of the year, and then obviously just right at 22 days before Oklahoma kicks it off.
Yeah, tomorrow being Saturday, and then add 3 weeks to that, add 2 weeks for any kind of college football. If you're just into just watching anybody play on that Saturday, there's a few games, but of course the Sooners get underway with just about everybody else that following Saturday. So we should probably start right there with any word on fall camp, any young players standing out, anything that you've picked up.
Yeah, I actually have a pretty. I think so. The one difference is Venables has been very, very, very much more open in terms of his practices and stuff like that. Let
Not
the media.
surprisingly.
Yeah, absolutely, not surprisingly, he had let the media watch practice. I think twice this week. Now I do think that that's probably about about it for now. I think they're moving to the rugby fields there on the campus of Oklahoma, where their Venables had talked about this is going to be the 10 toughest practices of the year, kind of getting them ready. But no, a lot of good notes just across the board. From a quarterback perspective, Dylan Gabriel's doing everything that you would expect him to do. He looks on film maybe even a little bit quicker in some of his rollouts and things like that, moving around the pocket than even he did. So I I would suggest there's a little bit of agility and foot speed work that he has done through the summer. But everything looks really really solid with him. Has a total grasp on the offensive playbook. I think look down the depth. I think Davis Bevel has really solidified himself as that number two player, which I think a lot of us thought that would be the case coming in with the only other quarterback on the roster with any kind of measurable experience at the FBS level. So I think he's there where you would expect, and certainly some battles are going on for that third the third string area. But I think you feel good where you're at if you're a Oklahoma fan with Dylan Gabriel and then Davis Bevel there as well. Then as we move kind of to the running back position, Eric Gray is the guy. He's going to be your starter day one. I mean, I think there's even something that Levy had talked about through some of his press conferences, before the actual fall camp started, and talked about he's going to be there. It starts with Eric Gray, so I think that obviously put an end to any kind of not necessarily competition, but any kind of controversy in terms of who's going to be that starting running back. I think Javante Barnes has been hobbled a little bit with I think an ankle injury, nothing serious, but just it has been out. So I think there's been a couple of guys that have really taken advantage of having him out. Marcus Major, I would say right now he's probably the backup running the number two running back from everything that I've seen and heard. And then I think the guy that's really taken a great opportunity of this time is Gavin Sawchuk. So he's a guy that the team has basically said is the best, or sorry, not the best, the fastest player on the team. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think he'll certainly play in the 4 games, just in 4 games, just to get his just to get those 4 games in, but then trying to decide if it looks like a redshirt season. I think they're a little bit more, obviously, a lot more depth in that running back room. And then from a wide receiver perspective, I think there's 3 guys that have really kind of risen to the top from a depth chart perspective. I think that's when you look at Drake Stoops, Marvin Mims, and Jalil Farouk. I think those were the three guys that will probably be your starters. Theo Weiss and a 4 wide receiver set there. But I think you're seeing really good things. Obviously, Weiss, really good things from J.J. Hester, LB Bunkley-Ship, and then just some other guys. So I think you like your depth. There's a lot of outside of Weiss, and he's still unproven to a certain degree. And Mims, you've got a lot of, and then of course Stoops, you've got a lot of unproven talent. So will be interesting to see how that comes across. And then kind of looping the offensive line and the defensive line together. To everything I've heard, there is it's night and day, the bodies on both of these groups. Would you expect that would be the probably the two groups that would gain the most from a strength and conditioning perspective? I think there's a different level of toughness. There's a different level of physicality, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, which you would expect as teams playing early on with a lot of, I think, a lot of focus, a lot of kind of anger, attitude, hostility, things like that. All things that you would expect from a Venables coach defense. I think there's a couple of interesting things on the offensive line perspective. I think you've got a true freshman in Jacob Sexton who is really pushing Wanye Morris from a tackle at the tackle spot. I don't know specifically, Mark, if that really lends that to believe that Sexton is coming in and is performing extremely well, as a true freshman, or if it's more of an indictment on Wanye not necessarily playing to his capability. So we'll see how that continues to go through, but through fall camp. But he's pushing him. And Tyler Guyton, a guy that transferred over from TCU, a young kid, hasn't played a ton. Really at the offensive line position, but anytime you've heard Venables talk, whether it would be in some of the spring stuff and then summer, obviously, he's really talked about Guyton as a guy that he's mentioned several times. So I think he's a guy probably not ready for a starting spot, but I think he could be a backup, or at worst, provide that depth at the tackle position. And then as we move over to the defensive line, I think you're pretty solidified with your starting defensive line of Ethan Downs. Then you've got the transfer from Tulane, Jeffrey Johnson. And then you've got Jalen Redmond, and then Marcus Stripling at the other edge position. They've talked a lot about Redmond. He has done best summer of his life, from what I've heard, in terms of what he's been able to do, on the field strength. He's up right at about 300, maybe a little bit above. I think that's the biggest that he's played at. So I think he's had an outstanding fall camp, really a good summer, everything that you would expect and want him to have. I think he's out. He's had a little bit of a slight concussion that he's been dealing with, so he's been out a couple of days here, but nothing too serious. Another guy you kind of mentioned, younger guys that have kind of not really separated themselves, but kind of been a focal point. Kelvin Gilliam is a guy that from what I've heard, has really improved his consistency making plays. Obviously, he comes in as a redshirt freshman, played some last year, had the body type, I think, coming in, but didn't necessarily have the mentality that you would look for. And obviously that's kind of understandable from a freshman perspective, but have really heard that that's changed, that he's going to be able to provide Oklahoma a lot of depth on the defensive line. I think this is a defensive line on all on all three positions, whether you look at end, whether you look at inside or at the edge position, is going to be able to go 2-3 deep comfortably. Now, this is something that we heard last year, so we take that with a little bit of grain of salt, knowing that obviously there's a different staff here, but there's a lot of optimism at this time of the year last year with how good this defense looked and how good this defense could be. So I think, at least for me, I'm taking a very cautiously optimistic viewpoint, on this. And I mean, to a certain degree, when you see some of this stuff, it's a little bit different. But when you get practice notes from others, you don't quite, or what you see, you don't quite know. But I think it's a little bit different this year, being able to actually see it um, a little bit more than we've seen in the past. And as we go further into the defense, I think Danny Stutzman, and David Guebu is having a really, really solid battle between the two of them. From a linebacker position perspective. Then when you move into the secondary a little bit, you've got Woody Washington, who is he's most assuredly going to be one of your starting cornerbacks. And I think DJ Graham has done a lot of good things that make you believe in camp that he's absolutely going to be your other starter. Still a good competition. I think Josh Eaton has played really, really well early on in the camp as well. A guy that I think we talked about a little bit as well, Mark. That's really kind of started to turn the table a little bit, just in his seriousness and approach to the game, and it looks like that's kind of manifesting itself on the field, at least early on. But I think the guy in the secondary, honestly, that has done just a tremendous job from where he came in the spring is Justin Harrington. And so, kind of interesting that you kind of displayed that right there on the screen. Is he's done just an outstanding job, and I think he's played himself into a starting spot in some way. Now, whether that's the cheetah position, whether that ends up being at the nickel, um, will be interesting to see. But if he keeps going, Venables in his own way, Venables doesn't really necessarily go out of his way to specifically pay compliments to people, to these kids, but he was very glowing when he spoke about Justin Harrington, and I think the position flexibility that he gives Oklahoma, as I mentioned, both at the nickel and at the cheetah right now. So if his progression keeps going, really, I think, Mark, the way it is right now, I think he has an opportunity to start at one of those two positions. I think, as I mentioned, and things change and it'll be interesting right now. I think yesterday was the first day that they were in full pads. So it'll be interesting. Things look a little bit different from a physicality perspective when you have full pads on, as opposed to just the shoulder pads. But I think that will be very, very intriguing, because I think right now, Mark, you probably have 4 of your 5 starters pretty well solidified in the back end. In my opinion, I think you got DJ Graham and Woody Washington as your corners. I think you got Key Lawrence and Billy Bowman as your 2 safeties, and now you've got this you've got this cheetah position, and then the nickel back, where there's a good, healthy competition going on there. You've got Justin Broyles there. You guys, as I mentioned, you've got Harrington. You've got you've got the transfer from North Carolina, Trey Morrison, in the mix there. So you've got a lot of good, healthy competition there. But you like what you hear just overall, and I think that obviously there was a little bit of distraction, within the team. But everything that I've heard, Mark, is that the team, there's not a lot of discussion about that internally. They've kind of moved on, and they're just laser focused on the first game. And so and before I in here, just in terms of shifting, so Venables is very, very open and very transparent about things. He's not super transparent about moving guys around. So, John, to your point, yeah, he does move guys around a ton, and he will in the back end and then the linebacker position and stuff like that. But he doesn't really speak a lot about that. So I'm sure we'll see some things when that first depth chart comes out. But there's not a lot of information that he talks about. But he does talk about the fact that he does move guys around that can be moved around. I mean, like a guy like Billy Bowman, he's talked about, he's definitely, not going to move him around based on how much that he got moved around last year. But you got a Harrington guy that will move around a bit, and things like that. So not anything specifically, but you can bet that he will be moving guys around to try to get that best mix, on the defense side of the ball at least.
OU Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. where it counts. So please join us on time each and every week. The only reason I say on time, not scolding anyone, but you just want to get here on time because we invariably every week have the most people online at the end of the show. People filter in throughout the hour, which is fine. You can watch the replay, but if you want to jump in to the conversation, of course, they're in the live chat and ask us questions, make your comments. We'd like to post those to the screen and address as many as we possibly can. So get here each and every week at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. So we have, courtesy Jason, thanks to Jason, no thanks to me. I just throw my 2 cents in every so often. We have made it through the offense. We've made it through the defense, every position. So check out those videos, either the individual clips that you see posted on the channel or, of course, within the live shows. And we previewed every position on the field, but we're not going to leave out the special teams. It's 1/3 of the game. Now, I do have certain reasons why I don't believe special teams is as important as it once was. Specifically in college football. Number one, you don't have as many kickoffs returned as you once did because the ball's brought out to the 25-yard line. So that went into play, whatever it was, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And now that you can down the football wherever on the field and get it out to the 25-yard line, less kick returns there. I think the punters are better with hang time, and they also now you have a number of punters that obviously flush to the side and rugby kick it, which makes for less returns, balls kicked out of bounds. The punters are better, less returns in the punting game. Also, the value of blocking a punt is huge, but the risk is also enormous. So you see less teams. You see most of them just peel back and allow the punter to kick the ball. Therefore, again, they have time to give it a beat or two before they kick the ball. The coverage gets down, less punt returns. So a lot of reasons why there's less activity in the kicking game, punt returns, kickoff returns, but obviously still extremely vital. And when you need a 52-yarder at the gun, you want to have that guy that you send out there with confidence. And Oklahoma's had that the last few years, but not this year. And they do bring back one of the best punters in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, this is beating a dead horse here in the difference between these two regimes. But Lincoln Riley and his group, they really did not put an emphasis on special teams. It was worked maybe about an hour a week total from a practice perspective. And so Oklahoma Invincibles has really, made it a priority for this to be, I mean, to your point, I do agree with what you said for the most part. I do say that the special teams for Oklahoma, particularly against Oklahoma State, was a big reason why they lost that game. They fumbled, I believe it was a kickoff that they fumbled, set up Oklahoma State. For touchdowns. So you've got that 14 points there. But be that as it may, I think Oklahoma's brought in Jay Nunez, who is an Oklahoma native, who was a special teams coordinator at Eastern Michigan over the last few years. So he is an off the field analyst role, but he kind of coordinates that special teams. Brandon Hall has done that previously for Troy and where he's been. So I think there's a lot more emphasis on that. As you mentioned, I think it's at this point this year, it kind of starts with Michael Turk from a punter perspective, one of the best punters in the country last year. I think just over 51 yards per punt a year ago. Kind of funny, he did not punt enough. He didn't have enough attempts to, I think, basically qualify himself for some of the awards and things like that, but was right there with the guy from San Diego State. I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. I had it.
But
I had it earlier.
he's the guy.
But
Yep.
but yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the best ones in the country. I think he gives Oklahoma a really good weapon to pin people deep or things like that. So, 51.2 yards per kickoff. Not even quite 3 punts, per game.
As opposed to Jason to 67 with Arizona State a couple of years earlier.
Right. So I think that's you've got that's solid right there. And then when you look at the as you mentioned, Gabe Burkich, was a huge weapon for Oklahoma over the last couple of years, and he's no longer here. And I think you've got a couple of guys that are really, it's not the sexiest position battle on the team, but you've got a couple of guys that are probably battling for that spot. Zach Schmidt is the guy who was the backup last year, who I think a lot of people came in thought that he would probably be the guy, and probably is. I would say he's the incumbent. But then you've also got a true freshman, Gavin Marshall, that has been I think he's the number 5th rated punter in the 2022. Fifth rated kicker in the 2022 cycle. So I think you like where Oklahoma is at. At that, and both look pretty good in the spring game. And I don't really have any concerns whatsoever with that. But you've got, as you mentioned here with Burkich, a guy that has been really, really good for Oklahoma over the last few years. And he's a guy that it's not easy to replace. And then I think that will continue to be something that you look at. It's one of those things. Like, I think your field goal kicker is like a umpire in baseball or a referee in football, that you don't really even almost notice that he's there until he starts missing a lot of kicks, and then the sky is falling, so to speak. So we'll see like that. I would expect Marvin Mims to continue his role as a punt returner. In terms of a kickoff returner, I think you've got probably Eric Gray and Marvin Mims as your leaders in the clubhouse to return kicks. But a couple of other guys that you've got there that may enter into that equation. You've got you've got Billy Bowman, you've got Marcus Major, who may enter into that, and then a couple of new guys that you would not be surprised. I know from a coach's perspective, there's a little bit of anxiety, I think, putting true freshmen back there, whether it's a punt returner or whether it's a kickoff returner. But don't be surprised to see Gavin Sawchuk or Jaden Rowe, who's the other guy, very, very athletic on the defensive side of the ball. He's the other guy that's mentioned in the same vein as Sawchuk as being the two fastest players on the team. So wouldn't be surprised to see them in the mix. But I would see, maybe not necessarily, but maybe so, but maybe not necessarily the same efficiency from a field goal kicking perspective. But I think overall, I think this unit will be better than it's been before, without a doubt, just because of the more emphasis that's being put on that unit.
So we have accompanied all of our position previews with a poll, and the latest from the defensive backs conversation that we had last week is who will be Oklahoma's best defensive back in 2022. Thank you so much for your votes. They still count, so you can vote. This is on the community page on the channel right here. So just go to that tab on the community page. You'll find it with a couple posts down. But who will be Oklahoma's best defensive back? 861 votes. Woody Washington with a slight edge over Key Lawrence.
Yeah, no, I think he comes in, Mark, as the best, the best at least a cornerback, cover corner on the team, cover guy on the team. I think when he was out for a decent amount of 2021, I think Oklahoma really suffered in the back end, right? So I think that's to be expected. A little bit surprised that DJ Graham came in last place, but I think it's almost a "what have you done for me lately" type of thing mentality sometimes, and he. Um, Probably had his worst game ever as a Sooner in that bowl game against Oregon. So I think there's a level of this is what we saw last, so this is kind of our thought process. But I think one of and part of the notes that I've been able to dig up and what I've seen and heard is that as a group they feel like this could be one of the best units on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they play as a unit, because as we've talked about, this has been the area on the defense that has that overall more times than not has let Oklahoma down. Has not been as consistent as they need to be, in the back end. And certainly a pass rush absolutely helps that. But we'll see how that goes. I think they're a little bit deeper this year than they have been in the past, but certainly I agree with the vote and the fans here that's certainly led by Woody Washington.
Folks, you can do basically what you've been doing for the last 25 minutes and do each and every week here at Sooners Live in the live chat, discussing college football with each other. You can do that all the time on our Discord. It runs 24/7, 365 all the time. These guys are on there at all hours of the night, during the day. Pick your time, jump on there. We've got about 65 online. We would love to have many more on our Discord. Talk Sooners, talk college football all the time. Go to patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV, and you sign up there. I get you the link. I even send you a nice little plaque for joining our Patreon, which involves a whole lot of other stuff. So this is just a slice of what you get, but just kind of highlighting the Discord, which again is just a big chat room. Just a big chat room. We currently have a divided national chat room, Big 12, ACC, Big 10, Pac-12, SEC, but we can always expand that. Shoot, if Oklahoma gets so much discussion in our chat that we would just want to make a separate Oklahoma discussion, we'll do that. If Oklahoma recruiting conversations become so much, we'll just make a separate chat for that. So we all sorts of things that we can do with it. So please sign up at patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV. Before we get to a few other things on a national scale, you did have some recruiting notes for us, right, Jason?
Yeah, so Oklahoma's got, Mark, a couple of, one for sure announcement, and I think there's momentum. Coach Johnson, Mustang, Oklahoma, here is going to announce his commitment. Sorry, I don't have the time, the exact time, but it's going to happen tomorrow. I think Oklahoma's in a good position here for Johnson. He's been first of all Oklahoma by numerous for quite a while. I feel good. Another top in the country as well. Number 2 player in the state of Oklahoma. So I think obviously this will be a really good get. Projects him to be more of a defensive back at Oklahoma, but certainly has played both sides of the ball. And then you've got so in what I said, all signs are pointing to this next one. We've not really heard an official announcement, but I think you're probably looking at Peyton Bowen solidifying where he's going to go tomorrow as well. Of course, this could change, but as of right now, this is kind of what I'm hearing. And honestly, I have no clue what he's going to do. I mean, A&M's got into the mix a little bit with what what they were, what they're kind of about from a recruiting perspective. You concern yourselves, with that. When you look at when you look at Notre Dame, I think a lot of us felt like, a lot of people felt like that Notre Dame was probably the third choice between right now, even though he is actually committed to Notre Dame. But I saw something on Twitter the other day related. It looked very positive with I think it was Peyton Bowen's mom, tweeting out some about both of his kids, both of her kids going to Notre Dame, but Oklahoma likes where they're at with him as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see if we see any kind of crystal ball movement or prediction movement today, or even early tomorrow related to where he's going. And then on the 25th, you've got a couple of announcements. Makari Vickers, the cornerback out of Tallahassee, Florida. I think he's actually listed as a safety. I think Oklahoma actually likes him as a cornerback as opposed to a safety. I believe number 8 safety overall. Again, a top 100 overall player from the state of Florida. Oklahoma's has been in a battle with Alabama. Oklahoma's fairly ahead here, so I think Oklahoma. Oklahoma gets Vickers. Anthony Evans also is a wide receiver that's going to make his announcements between Oklahoma and Georgia. I think there's been a little bit of momentum on the Georgia side. I think there's still confidence that Evans still will be a pledge to Oklahoma, but I think there's still a little bit of uneasiness related to that. It's not necessarily a slam dunk, and so that's all that I have really, just in terms of the upcoming commitments. You've got Jordan Raynaud, who's going to announce here in the September, early October timeframe. You've got Malachi Coleman that will announce in October. You've got DJ Hicks, who as of right now still is probably a close to a signing day announcement as well. But so I think the other thing that's really important to kind of talk through and confirm here is Cale Gundy was a dynamic recruiter, and so what does that look like on the recruiting trail? What does that look like, from a coaching perspective, and what does that look like with the commitments that Oklahoma already has in this 2023 cycle? I think the biggest one was Jaquazi Petaway was the wide receiver that Oklahoma has got one of their top rated recruits, high 4-star kid. When the announcement came out, he had, he tweeted a couple of things that made you believe that there was a high level of concern with his commitment and potentially opening up his recruitment again. But a couple of days ago, he solidified that he wasn't going anywhere. He's still committed to Oklahoma. He's still as entrenched, within that commitment as he has been. So I think the good thing is the interim wide receiver coach, LaDamian Washington, who had come from, he was an off the field role, come from Missouri, left this alma mater to come to Oklahoma in an off field role. Obviously, this will be his first on field coaching role in his career. But I think he's had great relationships with a lot of these 23 recruits, and certainly a lot of the players on the field. So I think that was really a positive for Oklahoma to see Petaway come out and confirm his commitment to Oklahoma. So we'll see how that continues to go from a recruiting cycle perspective. I think, again, Evans is another guy that we'll see. It looks like that's the change there from at the wide receiver coach position has not really impacted his thoughts and his beliefs and what he thinks of Oklahoma, but that'll certainly be something to keep an eye on, because as Venables mentioned in his press conference a couple of days ago, a team coached, an Oklahoma team coached by Cale Gundy Cale Gundy is certainly stronger than the team that's not coached by him. So obviously there's a little bit of a drop off there, but I think that kind of remains to be seen on what that looks like on the field this year. So that'll be interesting. I think the good thing with that is you got Matt Wells, who is an analyst that has been brought in, who is kind of helping him in that regard. So I think having a guy like Wells there, who's a two-time previous head coach, I think very very much helps with Damian Washington and his maturation of an on-field wide receiver coach, at least for this year.
Jason, Matt Bingham is asking in the chat, and this is something you addressed, I believe, last week, in stating that you thought that the David Hicks decision was going to go pretty much the full route, maybe down to the wire.
Yeah, I still think he's a fairly heavy lean to Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's still his favorite, but I think this is like I said, this is a process that's going to go through a while. I think at best case scenario, I think he commits in November, but I'm still right now leaning more towards the unless something changes, closer to the. He was always planning on signing or announcing on that Under Armour under the Under Armour All-American game there. I know he's going to take an official visit. I know it scares people every time you hear this, but I think he's going to take an official visit to Alabama. I'm not sure when, probably early on in September. He's going to take another visit to Oklahoma as well, and he'll go through the process. So I think it will. But he loves this Oklahoma coaching staff. I know he's had a long-standing relationship with Venables, long-standing relationship with Todd Bates, and I think he's obviously still I think the prize here over the last the last little bit of the recruiting cycle, because Oklahoma's got, I think, 19 right now. Could have as many as 21 before next week starts, and they've got some good, obviously some good prospects, but there's not a whole lot of room left. 5 or 6 more guys probably after this weekend. So we'll see. I think there was a tweet out after the party at the Palace that there was a few locks, out there. I think you've got a couple. Colton Vasek was one. I think Jacoby Johnson was another. I think you look at possibly Ryan Yates being another one of them. Jordan Raynaud, I believe, is another one, and I think the other one is really kind of up for debate. So I don't know necessarily who the 5th one is. There was a lot of rumors that Hicks was the 5th one. I don't think that was the case, but we'll see who that 5th one was.
We also just a few days ago had the preseason coaches poll released, and I think very similar to what the discussion has been for the entire offseason, coming off of a situation in which Oklahoma was a heavy favorite last year. Baylor, Oklahoma State obviously played a down to the wire, down to the final inch Big 12 championship game after Oklahoma State had just won a narrow game against Oklahoma, in which the Sooners would have been in the Big 12 championship game, just kind of. And then with the change of coaching staffs at Oklahoma, new quarterback, it's a pretty reflective here in the preseason coaches poll what the thought is, and it's a tight 3-team, maybe 4-team race. OU starts at 9, Baylor 10, Oklahoma State 11, all lined up. I screwed up on the typo there, but anyway, Baylor 10, Oklahoma State 11. And the interesting note about Texas is that the Longhorns received 1 first-place vote from these votes are public. I'm surprised that somebody hasn't looked that up and found it.
Yeah, I've heard some debate. I wouldn't. I mean, I would not even in the least bit be surprised if it was Nick Saban that did it, just to how he is about rat poison and to motivate his team for that week 2 game. But I don't know. I mean, it's all. I think it would be a lot of speculation at this point. I'd heard some, and this was from just to give them the credit from Gabe and Teddy Lehman that I think it was Gabe Eichert that mentioned, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, it could have been Lincoln Riley, just the last little peace offering to Oklahoma for. But no, I think it's in terms of Oklahoma, Baylor, and Oklahoma State, I think it's one of those things. Not necessarily surprised where Oklahoma is. I mean, not really surprised where either of those three are. I think it is interesting that they're all in a cluster there, 9, 10, and 11. So I think it might be one of those things that we're not completely sure who the best team is, or who those best three are. So we're just going to put them in a cluster and give Oklahoma the benefit of the doubt because they've been the better team. Through the years. Obviously, but I think it's interesting that this Big 12, and certainly we'll get to our predictions, here in the next couple of weeks. But the Big 12, I think, is more balanced than it's been in a long time. I think you legitimately probably have 5 teams that could make it to Jerry World for the Big 12 championship game. You've got Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Texas, and I would throw Kansas State in there as well as teams that potentially could that could make it. But I mean, you've got some other teams in there as well, Mark. I mean, Iowa State seems to really just love the underdog role, and so maybe they were a little bit of an unfamiliar role last year, and it certainly didn't work out for them. I think they're back to where Matt Campbell and that team likes to be, and more of a undervalued, underappreciated team. So yeah, I mean, and then you've got some other teams, like TCU. What does that look like with with Sonny Dykes patrolling the sidelines? You've got Texas Tech with Joey McGuire. So you've got a lot of new faces, and you've got a lot of teams that have, that are coming in with that, that new coach gives that new sense of energy coming into the season. So, it'll be really interesting to see how this conference shakes out. But in terms of the preseason coaches poll, this is about where I would expect Oklahoma to be at. I was sort of expecting both I think the AP comes out, is it Monday or maybe over the weekend or something soon. But I mean, I think it was just the whole thing is just laughable that Texas has it has to be, you almost feel like it has to be a joke to give them a number one vote. But no, I mean, I think it's fair for Oklahoma to be right where they're at. That would I expect like number 7 to 10, somewhere in that neighborhood for Oklahoma. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's they, from a national perspective, I saw that they pushed back at least a little bit their the first college football rankings of the year, and so this means this is just for us to talk about. It doesn't really mean too much, just yet. But yeah, and I think USC came in at number 15, if I remember correctly, 14 or 15. So yeah, it's really interesting. It will be very interesting to see the difference between the writers versus the coaches. And as we know, sometimes the coaches, I don't know how often it is that the coaches even vote, the head coaches even vote here. It might be an admin or someone someone else within the program that actually does that as opposed to the head coach.
Yeah, Jason, you bring up the Texas anomaly there with the number 1 vote. That's even underlined even more because there's only 3 other teams that got number 1 votes. The number 4 team in the country didn't even get a first place vote. The number 4 team in the country, yeah. Clemson, and then there's Texas with 1. People are. I look at it this way. This is my opinion. People can vote for whomever they want. It's a preseason poll,
right.
And until there are games played that you have to justify your vote with substance, with results on the field. Of course, you can't just vote whomever you want after games are played. It has to be justified with results. Hey, you can vote Kansas number one. I don't, I don't really care. I, you know, and then there also, and we've had this conversation before, basically two different ways to view it or approach it. One would be, these are who I believe are the 25 best teams in the country, first best, second best, third, fourth, etc., down to 25. And then there are other people that look at the schedule and try to make a prediction. They're trying to basically predict or project, this is what I think the final 25 is going to look like at the end of the season.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's all I think it's all about perspective as far as that goes. And I don't. I mean, I think it's fun. It's fun to talk about. Interesting to discuss. What I mean, and I don't necessarily really have any. Just going just about the poll, just in general. I don't really have um, anything that I would just adamantly disagree with in terms of the top 10. I think the spread between the distance between number one and number two, I think it should be a lot closer in my opinion, and what it is. I mean, I understand why. Obviously with Alabama's done it year in and year out, but um, I think the margin is much closer between Alabama and Ohio State than it was really that has really been provided here within this poll. So that'll be interesting to see what that looks like on the AP side as well. But as we talked about a little bit last week, I'm pretty high on Ohio State this year, so it will be. It will be interesting. I think Alabama has even a little tougher schedule than um, than Ohio State does. And I can pull it up here, but I know that Alabama goes to Texas. I think they could go to Tennessee. There's a couple of other decent road trips that they have that they have here that I think it's a little bit over the course of the year. I think it's a little bit more tough um, than what Ohio State's is. Just
Yeah, and just thinking back to last year, since the home road alternates, Bama has Texas A&M at home. Yeah, they should be going to Tennessee this year. They're going to Texas, of course. They should be going to Ole Miss this year. They should be going to Arkansas this year and
Arkansas.
LSU.
Yeah, Arkansas and Ole Miss are the two that I was thinking of road games. So, when you look at, when you look at Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, um, LSU, Ole Miss, I mean, I think those are not, I think those are tough road games to navigate and still go undefeated. So, wouldn't be surprised to see a loss in there somewhere. I just hope it's not the Texas, or we'll never hear the end of it. But could certainly see a loss coming in there somewhere.
Shorsey thinks that Ohio State has zero defense, which it did for much of last season. Actually, if you look at Ohio State's performance, they didn't have defense in 2 games in the regular season, and it cost them. They actually played okay defense against teams like Michigan State and Purdue that had really good offenses. But they've got plenty of talent on that side of the ball, and they've got a defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles who may fix some issues. So I wouldn't necessarily count on Ohio State not having a good defense this year. I don't know that it's going to be great. I don't know that it's going to go from 50th in the country to top 5 or 10, but I would expect it's going to be decidedly better. I think it's in good hands.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. I think it. maybe not to the same degree in terms of improvement, but you kind of link what Knowles can do on the defensive side of the ball versus what Venables brings to Oklahoma on the defensive side of the ball, and that new staff as well. So, but yeah, no, I think you see an improvement there, and the Big Ten doesn't have the best offenses in the country as well that you have to battle against. So I think. Yeah, I think you'll see them much improved on the defensive side of the ball as well, and that's really my big kind of belief in them nationally of being a little bit better, and possibly getting getting back to the college football playoffs is because of that increase on the defensive side. They're going to be able to score on whoever they play, maybe not necessarily at will, but would be surprised if there's anybody that can keep them under 30. 28 to 30 points this year.
Jim Knowles was very upfront, and we'll get back to Oklahoma, of course. This is a Sooner show, but Jim Knowles was very upfront this week. He said, these are the best players I've ever coached, and these are the most talented players I've ever coached. They're quicker, they're faster, they're stronger. And he said something about his coaching progression, and he said, I've arrived at a job that there are no excuses. I have everything I could ever need to win every game. He said, I've got all the facilities, all the resources, anything that's needed, that's required to win a championship. He said, he laid it all out there and said, I have no excuses in building a championship defense. Matt is asking, what's Oklahoma's defense prediction, even after losing 3 defensive line guys who started? I guess meaning in terms of a ranking, or what is realistic, optimistic, reasonable for a projection on Oklahoma's defense? What do you think is attainable based on talent and coaching?
Yeah, I think realistically, and what's attainable is I think this. Well, let me say that differently. I think realistically, I think this team can be a top 30 defense. I think from an attainable perspective, if they gel really well, if they get good play out of the secondary, I think you could possibly see this team as a top 20 defense at the tail end of the top 20. But I think you'll see them. I would be surprised if it's from a national ranking perspective, if it's any less than top 30.
All right, folks, we appreciate everybody being here. Comments and questions coming in on Oklahoma football. We're here every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m., where it counts in the Midwest in Oklahoma. And UTEP is the opponent in 22 days. And the Sooners, of course, get it going. I saw Dylan Gabriel in one of the national publications. I think it was Athlon's, rated the 19th best quarterback in the country. I think he might be a little bit better than that, but I don't think that's outrageous.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I would not necessarily get a ton of argument from my perspective, and certainly have the same sentiment that you do. But I think for him, he's never there's always a kind of an element of uncertainty coming in with a group of 5 kid coming into a Power 5 conference for the first time. What does the speed of the game, how does that impact him? I don't think it impacts him that much. He's got more. I think he's got better talent around him than he's had, whether at the skill position or in the trenches, which really that's the difference between group of 5 and Power 5 and on the offensive and defensive lines. But no, I think you could see him certainly being a top 10 quarterback, and maybe even top 6 or 7 by year's end if he has a really good season this year. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, I'll continue to say this until the game starts, but I think just overall, I think the Nebraska game is going to be a big catalyst for this team, one way or the other. Oklahoma's got two warm ups, so to speak, without disrespecting Kent State or UTEP. Coming into that game, couple of games where you would expect them to win comfortably. And then Nebraska has the same thing really in 3 of their 4 initial games. So I think that for both of these programs, really, but I think Oklahoma obviously has a higher trajectory than Nebraska does. So if Oklahoma goes up there and they win that game fairly comfortably, 10 to 17 points, then I think you can say that this team has an opportunity to be, pretty special team that can win a conference championship and possibly get into the playoffs. If they happen to lose that game, or if they win in a very uninspiring way, then maybe there's more of a, not a concern, I guess, but more of a maybe a level of doubt whether or not this team will be able to win a Big 12 championship. But
Oklahoma fans will, of course, have a certain interest in week 0, watching the Huskers and prepping for the game a couple weeks later when Nebraska takes on Northwestern in Dublin. And there is no reason why Nebraska shouldn't win that game. I'm not talking about by 7 touchdowns like they did last year. They beat Northwestern. They won 1 game in the Big Ten. They went 1-8 in the Big Ten. They beat Northwestern by 7 touchdowns last year. Northwestern is probably not going to be that much better this year. But I was asked this the other day, and looking at coaching, looking at head coaches and looking at coaching staffs in the Big Ten, there can be an argument that Pat Fitzgerald is the best coach in the Big Ten. And it's hard to argue based on his performance just at Nebraska that Scott Frost is not the worst coach in the Big Ten. And I'm not saying I'm predicting it right now, but it will certainly cross my mind that I could just see this like really ugly game and Northwestern winning some kind of 17-16 game against Nebraska. I think I may have mentioned this on this show. To listen to Pat Fitzgerald talk at Big Ten Media Days versus Scott Frost, Scott Frost is approaching that game like sometimes it almost sounded like what we hear sometimes out of Super Bowl coaches, where one of them has this bunker mentality. We're going over there. We're going to, this is a serious business trip. Scott Frost said several times, I'm not, I've let the players know they didn't earn this trip. This is not a bowl trip. We're going to be focused on football and we're going to be locked in and zeroed in, like this bunker mentality, and everybody's uptight. Pat Fitzgerald is taking it as, this is a once in a lifetime experience for a lot of people. We're going to sightsee. We're going to look at Ireland and win a couple of days before we'll really zero in. And it just reminded me of reading through Super Bowl stories and Super Bowl history of, I don't think this so much goes on now, but early in Super Bowl history, where one team would be super tight and the other team would know, okay, this is a long time to get ready for a football game. We better not be tight a week before the game and ready to put on pads a week before the game, because we're going to be worn out. We need to enjoy it. And then about 3 days before, we'll get locked in and ready to go. And those were typically the teams that won. And just to listen to the two coaches, that's what it sounded like to me. And again, Nebraska has no business losing this game, but I could see them blowing some kind of like 13-10 game, some really ugly game against Northwestern.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because I mean, with Oklahoma playing Nebraska, I've followed them a lot here in fall camp early on, and it's it's just so bizarre listening to them talk. It looks like no the staff, particularly Frost and Mark Whipple, offensive coordinator. It looks like they are on two different planets in terms of being connected to one another. And to your point, like Scott Frost, he seems to talk like he is scared to death for the season to even begin. Because I mean, I get it. He understands that he's got a team that has to be much better for him to keep his job next year. I think probably, I mean, at the very least 6 wins, but probably more in the neighborhood of 7 to 8, I would guess. And so I think I had, and just this just kind of shows the level of disconnect that what seems to be happening right now is, and I don't remember exactly what day it was, but it was last week where Scott Frost came on. I don't know if it was just an interview or if it was a press conference where he kind of talked about, he thought they were just had a really bad practice, just really bad specifically on the offensive side of the ball. And Casey Thompson comes on and says that later within that same, either that same interview or conference or whatever, and said he thought that they had the best practice they've had all fall. And so, like for the head coach to say one thing and the presumably starting quarterback say something that's a complete 180 is bizarre to me. But yeah, I don't know what to make of them. I completely agree with your thoughts. Would not be surprised to see anything honestly to happen in that game, other than I guess the Northwestern blowing out Nebraska. I mean, I think that would be absolutely surprising. But I mean, to your point, I've got Northwestern as being probably the least talented team in the conference. Maybe Rutgers. Maybe they battle Rutgers for that position. But I would certainly, I mean, for me, I have them finishing last in the West. So I think, to your point, they're much more talented. But yeah, the tightness and I guess awkwardness and how he's preparing his team to go to Ireland is very interesting. And it'll be interesting to watch here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, they were at Big Ten Media Days, and for anybody that watches what I produce on a regular basis, I am the last guy in the world that tries to read people's demeanors or their attitudes and try to make anything out of it. I just stay out of that. I don't try to pretend, okay, I can read somebody's mind, but it just seemed so obvious. Like he was the only coach there, Scott Frost, who seemed to be miserable. Everybody else seemed to be just enjoying the day. Let's talk football and discuss the team. He just looked miserable.
Yeah, I agree with you. And he looks that way every single interview I've seen. I mean, certain people handle stress differently, right? I mean, but my gosh, he's wearing it all over his face. And so I don't know, for his sake, I hope he can get Nebraska to a bowl game this year at least. They should at least win 6 games, but who knows? Some of those things can snowball if you don't play well early, and if they come out of this first 5-game stretch and they're at 3-2, as opposed to being 4-1, then it's going to be because we've talked about their first part of their schedule is fairly easy. I think they've got 5 out of 6 very winnable games there in the first half, but the second half of the schedule it gets tough in a hurry, specifically the last half. So yeah, he won't. If they go 3-2 their first 5, I feel like he probably won't survive.
All right. Somebody had asked in the chat earlier. I can't find the comment. I didn't know if it was a joke whether the Big 12 is the best conference in college football. But anyway, no, it's not. All right. Unless Jason thinks otherwise, and I don't believe so.
No, I would. I mean, if you want to say they may be the most competitive with each other within
Yeah.
the conference, I mean, I would buy that.
Yep.
Absolutely. But no, I think Big 12 is firmly number 3.
And I think going forward, it will be taking Oklahoma and Texas out and putting the other 4 in. I think it's going to be fascinating. If you just like college football and you don't give everything to the playoff, and some people the playoffs everything, and I get it. But if you just enjoy college football and want to see a competitive race, especially after Texas and Oklahoma leave, I think the Big 12 is going to be, what's it going to be then? 12 teams. Yeah. So like 10 of them, when they're running their programs well, are pretty much almost inseparable to some degree. You know, they're not right this second. Baylor and Oklahoma State are the best, but TCU's been as good or better than those two, and so is Texas Tech in the past. And they're all, anybody could be winning this conference every year.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Yeah, it'll be very balanced year in and year out. You know, whenever that happens.
Yep. All right. Jason Ray, last word on college football. Get on over there, check out Jason's work. I don't know if there's anything in particular, Jason, that you wanted to highlight, but Jason's at last word on college football.
I think next week we'll have something. I'll have something out there where I'm kind of talking about some of the key position battles for Oklahoma this fall, and I think that'll probably stretch us into the first part of the year.
Tonight at 8 o'clock on the main channel, we've got a West Virginia show that we do every Friday at 8, and then I'm going to follow that up with a call-in show and a Big Ten preview. We did the ACC, the Big 12, Pac-12 earlier this week. We got the Big Ten tonight at 9 Eastern Time, and the SEC coming up on Saturday. All right, Jason, appreciate you making this happen again, as always.
No problem. Enjoyed it.